Hey everyone, good afternoon. I'm Susan Coffin. I'm here for Attitude Magazine's weekly ADHD Experts broadcast. Today we are very excited to be talking to Linda Walker about productivity strategies that take advantage of the unique wiring of the ADHD brain. Adults with ADHD, all of us are always looking for new ways to be more effective and more productive in daily life. But it turns out that the productivity strategies from top gurus are not actually often ADHD friendly. We need to be engaged and interested in the tasks we're working on to be productive. So the good news is that Linda Walker will be talking today about how adults with ADHD can assemble a productivity toolbox that works for us or for you personally. Thank you so much, Linda, for being here today. I want to introduce Linda to you, to listeners. She is a trainer and a coach for entrepreneurs, adults with ADHD, and other, quote, creative geniuses. She has helped thousands of adults with ADHD move from chaos and overwhelm to productivity and feeling in control. She's the author of a book that I'd love to recommend to you called With Time to Spare, The Ultimate Guide to Peak Performance for Entrepreneurs, Adults with ADHD, and Other Creative Geniuses. You can get a copy of her free top 3 creative genius productivity hacks and learn all about her next free online workshops at her website, which is creativegeniusreport.com. So be sure to log on to creativegeniusreport.com. As always with Attitude Broadcast, Linda Walker is going to present her slides and then take as many of your questions as time permits. Before we start, we wanted to ask you to share your listeners with us, but all the other listeners, your biggest productivity challenge. Is it planning and time management? Is it working on too many tasks at the same time? Is it prioritizing tasks, or is it pretty much all of the above? So while you're completing the poll, let me just remind you that you can download Linda Walker's slides right now in the resource list widget. You can resize the widgets on your screen. And let me remind you, please, to close any browser sessions to make sure you're on a strong Wi-Fi network, or preferably a wired network, just to make sure that you can take advantage of everything that's said and Linda's video cam, because they are bandwidth intensive. So with that, let's see. All of the above. Okay. Well, Linda, yeah, I know you're not surprised.
No.
You've got your work cut out for you. I will turn it over to you. And thank you so much again for being here with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. So the objectives, basically, we're going to look through some of those strategies that Susan was talking about that are really struggling, those strategies that are being taught by traditional time management. They don't necessarily work for you. And the reason why I mention those is a lot of my new clients come to me and they say, I've tried all kinds of stuff and nothing seems to work. There's something wrong with me. And I want to make sure that you recognize that it isn't that there's something wrong with you. It's just that you're applying the wrong strategies to the type of neurodiverse brain that you have. And we are all neurodiverse. So I find that it's funny that we're trying to teach people to do certain things in a certain way when people are so different and have such different diverse approaches. And then we're going to look at 5 of these strategies that I hear a lot about, and then how you can tweak them so they actually work to your advantage. So let's get started, okay? So the first rule, and you'll see here at the bottom, the 2-minute rule is one of those strategies that came from David Allen. And some of you may have read the book, Getting Things Done. It's a very popular book. A lot of people have read it, have implemented some of the strategies, but one of the strategies that really does not work for most people, but definitely not for people with ADHD, is that 2-minute rule. The 2-minute rule says, if you're doing something and a task comes up that will only take 2 minutes, you should drop what you're doing and do that 2-minute task. And the challenge with that is, first of all, it plays to one of your weaknesses, which is the estimation of time. A lot of people struggle with estimating how long tasks take to complete. So you're thinking it's 2 minutes, but it's more than likely, 5, 15, 20 minutes. You're also having to prioritize, and you're actually not even prioritizing, because you're prioritizing based on what just came up instead of what's the most impactful thing you could be doing right now. It also means that after you finish that so-called 2-minute thing, you then have to remember to go back to what you were doing before, which a lot of my clients tell me they completely forget. They don't go back, and as a result, they find out at the last minute that they haven't completed something they had to do, and they're constantly running after themselves. One of the challenges that most people, and I think this is one thing that you want to take note of, is that every time we move from one task to the next, we are adding transition time. We all do that. You have to kind of pull yourself away from whatever you were doing, change the gears in your mind, and then move on to the next task. Well, that takes time. And that could be as much as 10 to 15, even 20 minutes from one task to the next. So this multitasking idea does not work either. When you're multitasking, you're adding time between tasks that is wasted. It's totally wasted time. The better strategy is when these types of things come up, and unfortunately that 2-minute rule, the 2-minute tasks or so-called 2-minute tasks come from the outside. People show up at your door, somebody calls you, an email pops up, or you have an idea, or you realize that, oh my gosh, I forgot something. Instead of stopping what you had planned to do, and hopefully you've been planning based on what's most impactful, you keep a catch-all list. I have a little moleskin book that's about 5 inches by, 7 or 8 inches, in which I write anything that comes up for me when I'm doing something that requires a fair bit of focus. When I've determined that this is what I'm going to be working on, instead of trying to keep it in my mind, because we know that one of the challenges is that with anybody is that we're trying to remember this. We say, okay, well, if I don't do it right away, I'm going to have to try to remember it while I'm working on something else. And that's not great either, because we burn so much more energy worrying about what we haven't done and are afraid of forgetting. And that's why a lot of people jump and do the task instead of actually just writing it down and saying, I'm going to do it later. Now, of course, if you're going to put it in a list, whether that's a moleskin notebook like I have, or my husband who's an ADHDer, I am the member of an ADHD family. Dwayne uses Evernote, but for me, it's if I use Evernote, I end up, falling into some traps. So I stay away from technology when I'm doing tasks that require a fair bit of focus. So the important part is, though, you have to have certain times during either the day or the week, depending on how often these types of tasks come up, to go back and review what you've written in your catch-all list, so that you don't let anything fall through the wayside. So that's the first strategy. By the way, one really important thing that I would urge all of you to do. A lot of people go to webinars and go to conferences, and they amass a ton of information and never actually apply it to anything. So I'm going to urge you to find in the strategies that I'm going to offer at least one that you will not only write about, but you will actually go ahead and implement. That's where real change happens for you, is when you start implementing things that you learn. So I would urge you to do that. Now, the next guru strategy that really doesn't work is eat that frog. If anybody's ever read any of Brian Tracy's books, he's well known for productivity knowledge, and as a business person, he's very well known and well regarded. And he wrote a book called Eat That Frog. And basically what that says is, do the hardest task first thing in the morning. And if you do that, everything else will be easy. The problem with that is that it assumes a couple of things. Well, actually quite a few things, but definitely it assumes that all hours are created equal. And that's not necessarily true. Most of us, actually all of us, have varying degrees of focus and and physical or mental energy throughout the day, and those vary constantly. There's actually a pattern that shows up for pretty much everyone. So if you're not a morning person, let's say, and you're trying to do that first massive task first thing in the morning, there's a good chance that if you couldn't get it done because you're not a morning person, you're not able to focus on that big task, that you're going to stay paralyzed by that task. It's going to overwhelm you, and you're going to say, oh my gosh, I didn't finish that task. I can't go on to do anything else. I have to finish that task. And that's the one of the main challenges with this particular strategy. It leads to paralysis. And when I mentioned before that we have different varying degrees of energy, you see these little energy bars that you see on the screen right now. Those are actual mental activity. It shows waves of mental activity, and our brain changes in terms of its mental activity throughout the day. To be able to focus, you need to be at that first beta wave, which it's a beta wave. If you're not in that position, if you're closer to the second one, alpha, you're not going to be able to focus long enough to be able to complete that big, scary task. And so you're going to be completely stopped. Now, on a regular basis, once a year at least, I usually teach participants of my program. I have a Focus to Freedom program, but I also offer a workshop where we kind of look at what are those energy patterns that you need to keep in mind without having to get your brain wired so that you know when am I best to do what. So I've discovered that really there are 3 energy patterns that you need to pay attention to. And those, there they are right here. So the first one is what I call the genius zone. That's a period of your day when you're able to focus quite well. You have high mental energy. You can actually sit quietly and not move for a little while, for quite a while. You're able to focus for long periods of time. And at that time, you can almost tackle anything. But ideally, you don't tackle just anything. You tackle tasks that require more focus. That's your genius zone. And we all have these types of this type of energy, even people with ADHD. I've heard some people tell me, even so-called experts say, oh, I tell all my clients that they can't focus for more than 15 or 20 minutes. That's not true. It's just not true. Most people with ADHD, not only can they focus quite well for long periods of time under the right conditions, they can have actually hyperfocus. The second type of energy that you want to keep a track of, or you want to notice throughout your day, is the kinetic zone is what I call it. It's a period of high physical energy, but the physical energy, especially in adults, may end up being more mental energy. You're not mental energy, but your brain is churning a mile a minute. It's got all kinds of ideas, and you're all over the place. That's the kinetic zone. You're able to focus, but for shorter periods of time. 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes at a time. But then you may feel like you need to move more. You may feel like you need to jump from task to task. And during that time, it's not so bad to jump from task to task if you're doing the right type of tasks. And that is short, maybe interactive tasks. And then there's a recharge zone. And unfortunately, in North America, we're terrible about honoring our recharge zone. The recharge zone is a period of your day when you can't focus. Your physical energy is really low. You will easily feel overwhelmed. A lot of people tell me they get overwhelmed when they feel that kind of tired. You almost... if you're trying to figure out when is my recharge zone happening, it's at a time in the day when you feel like you could probably use a nap. You may or may not be able to nap. I don't nap. I can't nap. When I wake up, I'm a big monster and a big bear coming out of hibernation. But some people can recharge by taking a nap. Others will recharge by going out for a walk. When I used to work for somebody else, I'm self-employed now, but when I used to work for somebody else, during my recharge zone, I'd get up and I'd deliver some of the things that I normally would have sent by email, and I'd talk to people. I'd ask questions about parts of a project that I was involved in or whatever. So it's one way. You can also go out for a walk. You can, there's a number of things that you can do, but 10, 15 minutes to recharge instead of forcing yourself to work through those periods when you're really, really tired. And they tend to happen at around this time. If you're in Eastern time zone, right after lunch, you often find yourself in that recharge zone. So take, honor those times, because if you don't, what happens is that you use up all your energy at work, and you don't have any energy back, afterwards. So your life is just really work and going home and feeling exhausted all the time. So it's not a great approach. Another thing that you could do to avoid eating that frog is sometimes you may have to build momentum. Sometimes your brain is just not stimulated enough by a task. Maybe a task is a bit challenging for you. So you can build momentum. And what that means is you can start with an easier, more fun task for you. And as soon as your brain is energized and stimulated, you jump on the task that's a little bit more daunting for you. And you do that every time you start losing traction on a more daunting task, you return to a task that's shorter, more energizing. And as soon as your brain kicks in, you jump back into the more daunting tasks. Hopefully you don't have too many of those daunting tasks, but I know, nothing is perfect. And sometimes most of us at some point need to do something that we don't necessarily like to do. So the third strategy that a lot of people talk about is the pickle jar. Now, you may not remember, some of you may not know this one because it's a little bit older, but what the pickle jar was is this idea that our time is like a jar. And the best way to manage time is to start off by putting the big things in your schedule. And then you still have space, big rocks in your jar would be those big things. And you still have space in your jar, so you could put in pebbles, and the pebbles will fill in a little bit of the spaces that are left by those big, the gaps that are left by the big tasks. And then you could still fill that jar if you put sand. So now they're talking about putting tasks that are even shorter and smaller and less. And what happens when you do that is you end up with a schedule or an agenda that looks like this. It is so incredibly overwhelming. But more importantly, it assumes that doing more is always equal to success, and that is not true. It is not doing more that will allow you to thrive. It's doing the right things. You always feel behind in a situation like that because there is no way that you can live up to that. When Dwayne was, before he was diagnosed and before we knew what he was struggling with, he really struggled with managing his time at work. And he would come home late in the evening and sit down with me and say, please, could you help me manage my time? And I didn't know any better than he did. I don't know why he would ask me that, but I wasn't a coach. I didn't even know anything about ADHD at the time. And that's exactly what his schedule looked like. By the time I was finished helping him, he had this schedule with these big blocks and all these little pieces that were crammed in there. And by the time he'd get to work, most of that was out the window because there'd be all kinds of things coming at him. Today, the way our work days are, we can't plan that way. It just doesn't work very well. So what you want to remember is it's not about doing more tasks. It's about doing the right task. That's how you get to success. You could do a whole lot of really short tasks and look at your agenda and say, oh my gosh, I got or your to-do list, because a lot of you don't necessarily use an agenda, but you have a massive to-do list and you've just scratched like 25 things in the day. But most of them are not really important tasks. They're not really tasks that are going to bring you any sort of success. They're not tasks that were really meaningful in your business. And we saw that one of my old colleagues, when I used to work for a pharma company, he used to prepare reports. He was a guru of report preparing. And at some point, he was asking he would be preparing reports for our salespeople, our sales managers, our product managers. And so he asked a sales manager, so what did you think of the last report I sent you? And didn't you find that this was interesting? And the guy said, you know what, I get so many of these reports. I just put it in a bin and I don't have time to look at them. Eventually, maybe, but usually I don't get to see them. And that kind of threw him for a loop because he had been working. He used to get into work early, around 8 or earlier than that, and he'd finish work at 8 or 9, having had lunch and supper at his desk. And so what he realized, he was writing 120 reports a month. And what he did was he got permission to assemble all the people for whom he wrote reports, or at least a sample of these people, and ask questions. How do you use these reports? How are they helpful for you? How often do you look at them? And what kind of decisions do they provide you with or help you with? And he realized that really out of 120 reports, only 42 reports were of any sort of meaning for the people that he was putting all these reports out for. So you can imagine the next month he went from 120 reports and had dropped it down to the 42 reports that made the biggest difference for everyone. So you can imagine he was no longer working till 8 or 9 in the evening. His wife was a lot less frustrated with him. So less is sometimes much more. The fourth one is managing by to-do list. And unfortunately, even some of my colleagues will tell you need to create a to-do list. And I don't necessarily agree. Maybe I'm an outlier. I don't know. I'm a little bit stranger on that, but I don't agree with the to-do list. First of all, a lot of people live with the Post-it notes. So this is what their to-do list looks like, a bunch of Post-its all over the place. It could be a bunch of Post-its on their calendars or a bunch of Post-its. I have 2 screens in my computer, and I was actually getting into these Post-it things, and I was posting Post-it notes on my second monitor, which is really foolish because that monitor is really useful, but not for Post-its. Or if you're not using Post-its and you actually have a list, the chances are you don't have a to-do list. You have a to-do book. So you can see this guy has got quite the list. And the to-do book does not inform you on what's the best task to do. It forces you to prioritize by task. It wasn't one of my first clients. My first client ever, when I first started as a coach in 2004, came to me telling me, I am a business person and I'm really struggling to get things done. Sometimes I have meetings with clients, and when they cancel, it takes me forever to try to figure out what could I do during that time. And she showed me her list, and there were 684 tasks in there. 684. I think that's the most I've ever seen. And what we found out was a lot of these tasks were running after papers that were missing from her income tax returns from the last 5 years, and tasks that were nice to do or nice to have, like organizing her cutlery drawer and those types of things. And it was overwhelming her. So that wasn't the best situation. And every time she'd have to prioritize her tasks, she'd have to go through all of these tasks and say, okay, which one's the most important out of all of these? That's a lot of prioritizing, and prioritizing is a challenging thing. It requires a lot of mental energy, and is not necessarily the best way to go. Prioritizing by tasks is not where you want to go. It also assumes that all tasks are created equal, and they're not. Some tasks are much more impactful than others. Some tasks will make a bigger difference in your business or in your job than other tasks. And finally, there's this psychological payoff of the short tasks. There was actually some studies done to see what do people do what are they doing when they're feeling productive? When I start with a new client, we always talk, of course, about productivity, because that's one of the main areas that I work on with my clients. And I'll ask them, when do you feel the most productive in your day? And many of them will say, oh gosh, between 4:30 and 6 o'clock in the evening. and I'll ask them what's going on at that time. Well, first of all, there's fewer distractions. Everybody's leaving for home, so there's no noise anymore. Nobody's bugging me. The phone's not ringing anymore. But also, they told me, well, I look at what I had planned to do during the day, and I realize I didn't get much done. And so I'm in a little bit of a panic. So my adrenaline kicks in, and I look at my to-do list, and I determine what are the next things I'm going to do. So I hammer out a whole bunch of things. And when I ask them, okay, what kinds of things are you doing? What kinds of tasks are you tackling? Well, they're leaving voice messages for somebody, for a few people. They might be writing a few emails. They might be filing some documents somewhere. But all of those things are not necessarily tasks that have any sort of impact in their work and did not necessarily advance any of their projects. So maybe some, possibly, but not necessarily. So you can't assume that all tasks are created equal. And that psychological payoff of the short task is a big trap for a lot of people. So what do? You plan by project instead of planning by to-do list. So one of the challenges that people with ADHD have is they need to have a quick, they need to see quick progress in anything that they do. If a project takes a long time before you get to the point where you're feeling as though you've accomplished anything, you will get very frustrated. And so I normally tell people, okay, first thing you want to do is you want to start planning by project. So you're going to take your to-do book and you're going to eliminate anything that doesn't need to be there, because there's a lot of tasks that are just nice to haves, and maybe you could think about them later. And maybe there's tasks that are no longer valid. And then you're going to transfer all the other ones into different projects. So you're going to create project task lists. Now, some people say, well, that's a bunch of lists again. So now instead of having one list, I'm managing 6 or 5 or 7 or 10. The thing is, you're not going to manage all of these all at once. Okay, instead of prioritizing by task, planning by project allows you to plan or to prioritize by project. When I started as a new coach, I was frustrated because none of my projects were really getting any traction. It felt like, nothing was happening, even though I was working hard, and I was seeing clients as well. And I love marketing. I find marketing is a creative thing to do. And so everything that was creative, everything that was marketing based, I would just gobble up and do like crazy. What I realized was, as I was talking to my own coach, was that I had 17 projects, all marketing projects, going on at the same time. When I looked at my week and tried to determine how many minutes or hours could I devote to each one if I devoted the exact same amount of time to each project, it was less than, between half an hour and an hour per week. So no wonder I was feeling like nothing was advancing, because it really wasn't. So the first thing you need to do once you've determined what projects you have in place is to prioritize and decide, okay, what are the projects I need that are really going to make a difference right now, that I need to put my emphasis on. And you reduce the number of projects that you're working on to 3 to 5, maybe 7 if you've got some projects that are close to the end of their life cycle. But last year, my daughter got married, my youngest daughter, and I was the one organizing that project. I'm the one who organized the wedding. It was happening at my house in my yard. So about a month before her wedding, there were only 2 projects on my list. One was the yard work to make sure that the yard was pretty, and the other one was the wedding. Everything else was parked. They were parked projects. As soon as the wedding was over, I pulled out the other projects, and determined what are the next projects I'm going to tackle. It made it a lot easier, because if you prioritize by project, it becomes very easy to determine what are the tasks that are priority for you. You look at each project and you determine, okay, what do I need to do in the next week? Not every single task that's ever happened in the world, but what do I need to do in the next week? It forces you in a way to prioritize by week. Now, some people might say, well, I can't prioritize by week because of the type of work that I do. And you can prioritize by half week. It doesn't matter, as long as you give yourself the opportunity to have a big picture view. You are big picture thinkers much more than you are detail oriented. The tendency for people with ADHD is to be visionaries. That's why a lot of ADHDers end up being entrepreneurs. So you're going to transfer all of these extra tasks, these little tasks that, or not little, these tasks that are impactful in each of your project to a priority list. And that priority list gets plotted into your agenda. And that's the process that I teach in my Plan to Succeed program. It's a weekly planning system that allows you then to be in control and not constantly feeling like you're overwhelmed and not achieving anything. The other thing that will help a lot is using systems. And a lot of people with ADHD don't like systems. They don't like the idea of routines, the word routine, because you're thinking of something boring. But routines are just a series or a sequence of tasks that you do always in the same way every time. But they're meant to be tasks that you repeat on a regular basis. So if I go to the gym, I want to make sure that my gym bag is always ready and I've already prepared everything that I need. I have everything that I need to do. I know exactly what I need to do once I get to the gym. So routines are there to support repetitive things that you have to do. They're not there to make your life boring. They're really there to support you. So they could be checklists. You could use technology. Technology today is amazing. The types of things that you can access with technology today is amazing. You could use workflows. You can use reminders, not necessarily always alerts. A lot of people have auditory alerts, and with our phones, it's quite easy to do that. The challenge with that is if you always use auditory alerts for everything, you get to the point where you become desensitized. So you want to do a mix. So for example, the gym bag that you see right there, if a client wanted to go to the gym at lunchtime or at the end of the day, I would have them put that bag in front of their door so they don't forget it on the way out the door to go to work. And so reminders can be these visual reminders as well. Okay, the last one, our last strategy that we're going to talk about today is the idea of time management. Now, that's what everybody uses. And I use the term just because that's what, people know what I mean when I say time management. But time management is a misnomer because time is not under your control. Time is a fluid thing. You can't accumulate it. You cannot bottle it. You can't use time that ahead of time. It's just once it's gone, it's gone. You've got zero control over time. What you do have control over is what you do with your time. So the tasks that you decide to do and the energy. So I usually tell people, manage energy, not time. And that goes a little bit with what I spoke about at the beginning, the idea of those energy patterns. There's actually a really good recent book that was written about these, exactly what I've been talking about for the last 15 years. The idea that you have different patterns of energy. The name of the book is When by Daniel Pink. And he actually shows the studies that have been done, and the majority of people find themselves in a certain pattern, but not everyone. So you do need to determine what your own patterns are so that you can really take advantage of this. And then when you know what your patterns are, you match the right task with the right level. I find myself in my genius zone first thing in the morning. I have another one in the early evening, but in the morning is my best genius zone. So I make sure, it's not right away though. I need my first coffee at the beginning of the day, but I have my genius zone first thing, close to first thing in the morning. So I make sure that I stay away from any time traps. And the types of tasks that I do at that time are things like writing, tasks that require a fair bit of focus for long periods of time. So I'll write, I might read something that's really complicated. I might analyze things, but it's really all about tasks that require high levels of focus for long periods of time. That's how I manage that. In the afternoon is more of my kinetic zone. So I feel a little bit more like I need to move. And or I need more interaction. And that's often when I meet my clients, because the interaction with clients is energizing for me. So I don't need to be not that I don't focus, but I don't need to be focused the same way as I do when I'm writing. So that's how I manage that type of tasks. So you want to, and then the next part is also to optimize your mental energy, to recognize that you have a Ferrari brain, as Dr. Hallowell says, and you need to treat it like a Ferrari brain. You need to put good, good oil, good gas, and so on. And you do that. You optimize your mental energy with good enough sleep, about 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep a night. You want to make sure that you get plenty of cardiovascular exercise, ideally 20 minutes minimum per day. You want to be eating, a lot less of the simple carbs and more protein-based diet, not necessarily fully protein, no, but a more nutritious diet, because you're trying to feed that amazing brain of yours. And you want to have times when you de-stress, and that could be nature walks, it could be a nap. A lot of my clients have a nap in the afternoon. It's a 15 or 20 minute nap, and that's it. Or it could be doing something creative. Whatever it takes for you to de-stress, you need that, because your brain works a lot harder than most to be able to focus for long periods of time. So, as a recap, you have a different brain wiring, and here's the scoop. We all have very different brain wiring. You need a different approach. Avoid transitions. Instead of doing a lot of tasks, determine what are the ones that are going to have the biggest difference in your life and in your work and in your job and your career. Prioritize by projects instead of by to-dos. It does a whole bunch of really cool things. First, it allows you to think the way you think best, big picture. And secondly, it allows you to have less to prioritize. You prioritize projects instead of a bunch of lists and lists of things to do. You want to work with your strengths instead of your weaknesses, and most importantly, you want to manage energy, not time. And that's it. So, I guess now is the time you could
Thank you so much.
Questions.
That was really fascinating. And really terrific. Thank you for such good, I think, universal tips for everyone listening in. Everybody listening, please, this is a moment to post your questions. Just a quick one, Linda, the name of the book that you mentioned, I think it was called When?
Yep. When by Danielle Pink.
When by Danielle Pink. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's see. So many good tasks. So many good questions. Maureen and a couple of others would like you to spend a little more time on the idea of planning by project. Mm-hmm. So, could you tell us more about how to do that effectively?
Okay. Well, it's a process that's going to take a little while. If you've been planning everything by to-do lists, if you have accumulated a massive to-do book, you may have to do it in steps, because it does take a fair bit of time the first time you're doing it, when you're trying to split all of those tasks into different projects. So when I started looking at the different projects that I had in place, I had 17 projects, marketing projects. It's a lot. And being able to determine what those projects are, and you don't need to write that's one of the things I didn't mention, but it's a good question that you're asking, because it forces me to tell you this. You don't have to write every single task you could possibly think of in each project, because that could be very long. Instead, you just take the tasks that you've thought of already and you put them in the project. Once a week, when you're sitting down and you're looking at your projects, you're looking at, okay, what are there notes that I need to take about this project? So my project task lists have an area for notes. Maybe there's a contractor I'm dealing with or whatever. It's got my milestones. What are some of the big pieces? When I launch a program, there's a lot of big pieces that I have to take into consideration. I have to write an outline. I have to start thinking about, who is most likely to want to how is it going to help people? What do I need? How am I going to transmit this information? So there may be several different milestones. And then you could look at once a week, you look at your projects and you say, okay, this week, what do I need to do that would make that project progress? And I usually put those at the top of my list so that they're easy to move to the priority task list afterwards. So each of my projects, so once a week I get a chance to really think through each of my projects. Now, it may sound very long, and the first time it is. I mean, everything that you do for the first time will take a bit of time. It might take an hour to do your first planning, your first weekly planning. But after a while, we're looking at, 30 minutes of planning a week. And it's a lot less time than what you're doing every single day. If you're doing planning every single day, or you're trying to figure out what you're going to do next, that takes a lot more mental energy than having it once a week. Plus, it forces you to do tasks based on urgency often. That's one of the challenges that a lot of people find themselves in. They're constantly doing the most urgent thing, and that's all they put their energy in. So when you plot the next 1 to 3, maybe 5 tasks, if there's some tasks that are really short per project, and you move them to your priority list, and then it's clear that these are tasks that are going to be your priorities. You move them into your agenda. You make appointments with yourself that you keep, and that's really key as well.
Okay. I think it's fascinating. A couple of questions about whether they're project-based softwares. Trello is mentioned by some people that you have seen be effective for people who are managing by project.
Yeah. The strategy that I usually, first of all, I usually tell people, learn the process first, and then the technology will come. Trello, I've tried a number of different project-based programs, and Trello has some advantages but some disadvantages as well. There doesn't seem to be any one particular project-based program. What I use and what I usually tell my clients to use is something like a note-taking system like Evernote or OneNote. And you create your lists. Each list is a note. Each project has its own list and it's a note. Instead of having relying specifically on a particular technology, I think it's more important to know the process. And then you could see, based on the type of things that you do, what would be better. But the majority of people find that using a note system like OneNote, or actually Evernote is the better one of the two, they find that is perfect. That is exactly what they need. And ideally, you want to do something you want to use technology because it makes it easier to move things from one thing to the next. When you're moving tasks from your project task list to your priority list, that's a 2-minute thing because you're just copying and pasting.
Okay.
So I don't have any one in particular. Yeah.
Okay. Can we come back to the question of lists? There's some questions here. How is the catch-all list different from the to-do list? And how and can you talk some more about transitioning your to-do list to your project list? And then finally, maybe this is even more. There are things that to-do things that are intruding on some of the listeners that really aren't part of a project. They're just stuff that has to get done. Your housework, repeated pickups, things like that. And how do they fit into a to-do list or a catch-all list or a project list or, energy management?
Okay. So first of all, the catch-all list, it's not a regular to-do list. All it is almost like a brain dump. So if I'm writing, for example, if you're writing or you're doing a certain task that you feel is the most important task that you need to be doing right now, and thoughts come to your mind, or people come up and say, could you remember to send me that such and such? Instead of stopping what you're doing and interrupting your flow of thought, and maybe not even returning to what you were doing, you just dump it on that list, the catch-all list. The key then is to make sure that the catch-all list is treated afterwards. So maybe there might be some things in there that belong to a project. You could put it in the project. If it's something that has to be done today, you might want to put it in your agenda today or in your priority list and manage it today. Or if it's something that needs to be done in the next couple of days, you could put it in your priority list. So the catch-all list is just normally once you get really good at managing your projects, you don't need the catch-all list as much. When I sit down nowadays, when I first started, my catch-all list at the end of a 3-hour work session or brain session might have caused 5 or 6 different tasks on my catch-all list. But now I very rarely get them because a lot of those tasks were, oh gosh, I forgot to do this. I don't forget to do those things anymore because I'm managing my project. Now, sometimes there are some tasks that you have in your big to-do book that are not project-based. So somebody mentioned, for example, cleaning the house. Well, ideally, you don't want to have to manage that every single week, manage that task, or it's not really a task, it's really a project every single week and try to determine, okay, where do I start now? So create a checklist. That's what I did. My youngest daughter has ADHD. And one day I was looking for a cleaning lady and she said, I'm looking for a job. You're looking for a cleaning lady. I'll be your cleaning lady. Well, her house is her room was the room of doom. So I didn't think too highly of her abilities. But what she had me do was make a list of what she needed to do, and in what order she decided what order she would do them, and that having that routine, that she created a routine in her schedule that for her it was Friday mornings that she had some time. So every Friday morning is when she would help clean the house. And that worked beautifully because she didn't have to ask every time, what should I do next, and so on. So whenever possible, you want to create those types of recurring things. I mean, unfortunately, cleaning a house is something you have to do on a regular basis. Now, there are things that may not be project-based, but there's a good chance that they're nice to haves, or I'd like to be able to do that one day. You could create what I had my participants do when they find a few of these in their big to-do list, is create a purgatory list. That purgatory list is just there. It's a list of things that, you want to do eventually at some point. And you can do one of those. You could choose to pick one of those or two of those on a weekly basis and include them in your priority list. So, for example, my client who had 5 years worth of income tax returns that she needed documents for. Well, she could have, what she did actually first was to create that purgatory list of those, because they were no longer required today. They were required 5 years ago, but she could on a weekly basis look at that list and say, okay, well, this week I think I'm going to make the arrangements to get this document or that document sent to me. Or there might be, I have a little bit of time here, so maybe I'll clean up my cutlery drawer or whatever. So you want to, as much as possible, create those projects, but you could create a project called purgatory list. And eventually you won't have too much of those, because those will come up on a weekly basis. You say, this week we have family coming over and we'd like to get a turkey, for example. Well, you'll put it on your list on your priority list, instead of necessarily creating a project around it.
Okay. Yeah, I call that my someday list.
Yes, exactly.
But most of the things on it never get done. So a couple of people are wanting just some clarification, just again, on what the priority list is and when you establish it. Is that a daily to-do list? How does that relate to the project list system?
So the priority list, when I'm looking at my projects on a weekly basis, I determine already what I'm planning to do, and I move those to the priority list. The priority list is a list that you use only for the planning process. So you're in the half hour that you're planning. Once you get really good at planning, in the half hour that you're planning every week, you have a priority list, and then you determine when you're going to do them. Because one of the challenges with a to-do list is that it doesn't tell you how long it's going to take. It doesn't tell you what should be done first. It doesn't tell you when should it be done. There's some tasks like writing that shouldn't be done when you're in your kinetic zone. Ideally, you plan your tasks based on your best, the energy that it requires and your best energy. When do you have that type of energy? So you plot that in your agenda, and it's your agenda that becomes your to-do list. So you are a lot more able to be realistic. Even I found myself in the past not being realistic at all about what I could do. We do this all the time. We're saying, okay, well, I've got this, and this that I have to do. And then somebody says, oh, could you do this? Oh, yeah, okay, I'll add it to my list. And then, oh, yeah, I need to do that. Oh, I'll just add it to my list. The next thing you know, and that's happened. I remember one client coming to me with 13 things on her list. One of those was to paint a wall in her son's bedroom. And I said, that's your weekly list, right? She says, no, that's what I need to do today. And I said, well, it's already 11 o'clock. By the time our session is over and you're home, what time will it be? Well, about 1 o'clock. What time do you have to stop? Well, at 3, because the kids come home. Well, you've got 2 hours to do 13 things. Chances are that's just so unrealistic. And she felt terrible. Every day she felt like she was a loser because all of the things that she never got done. She got some stuff done, but she couldn't get everything done because it was so unrealistic. Right. Now, if she looked at, first of all, the painting a wall is not a task. It is a project because you need to put something to protect the floor. You need to get the paint. You need to get the rollers and everything else. You need to dress in a way and then clean up after that. Those are projects. So when she started seeing that as a project, she realized, okay, there's some things I need to prepare ahead of time to be able to make that happen. And she was trying to write her CV because she was looking for a job. So that was something that requires a fair bit of focus. So she needed to schedule that in her week. When she started scheduling like this, it became a lot more realistic. And she would use then her agenda as her way of, as her Bible, if you want, as to what's the next thing I need to do now.
Okay. So you have, in theory, you have this brain dump list over here, and you have your projects lined up. And then you're saying each day you set up a priority list of what you're going to actually do that day? No,
once a week. Once a week.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So once a week you review everything, your projects and everything else, and you put it out on your calendar as to when you're going to actually do it. Is that correct?
Exactly. So once a week, you've done all of your planning. Now, one of the challenges at the beginning when you're first starting, especially people with ADHD, are not really they don't necessarily pay attention to how long something takes to do. And at the same time, if they try to do it at different times in the day, it may take a totally different amount of time. But as you become more, you start noticing more because you're plotting it into your agenda. Maybe you plotted something for an hour and then you realize, it really does take about 2 hours to do that. Well, the next time you're planning, you'll be able to say, okay, well, I know last time I planned that, I thought it was an hour, but it really takes 2 hours to do. So I'm going to give myself 2 hours to do that. And you become better at estimating time as well because you become more, you're gathering historical information about how long things take to do. And sometimes it's when is the best time to do it. But it's only once a week that you have a priority list. The next week, you'll go through the last week's priority list and make sure that everything got done. And, here's a big news flash is that most people don't get everything done that's on their on their list every week. There's just too many things that come in. But if you've gotten a fair bit of it done, and especially if you've outlined the things that are the most impactful, and I say impact instead of importance because importance doesn't necessarily cut it for people with ADHD. It could be important and it still won't get done. If once a week you look back and you say, okay, well, this one I didn't get done or I didn't finish because it took longer than I thought it would, then now you're mindful of how long it took or it's going to take, and now you could plot it for the next week. So
so do you do this on Sunday, for example, or Monday morning? Do you pick a time every week when you have when you decide what you're going to get done that week?
Yep, absolutely. My husband and I have an appointment every Friday afternoon now. At the end of the day on Friday, we meet on because he's at work, and we meet on Zoom, and we plan our things on both our ends. Don't even talk really. It's just to make sure that we create that space to make the planning happen. And so, yes, once a week, ideally at the end of the week or at the beginning of the week. I try not to use mornings, because if you're a morning person, you don't want to waste too much of your time planning. But it's it's not wasting your time planning, by the way, but it's really, you don't want to waste that brain
that
time.
Energy time, right.
Yeah, that mental energy. Yeah.
Okay, so interesting ADHD question here from two people. One person put it this way: I love firefighting. I love to jump into the emergency task. How do I keep myself from jumping into those fun, urgent tasks that actually might not be high priority? And someone else said similarly, I always find myself having emergency tasks, and that becomes very stressful.
It does. And the emergency tasks, if you do this planning like that, you will find that you have fewer and fewer emergencies as you go along. And that's what my planning program is an 8-week program. We work together for 8 weeks on managing this. And what we find is at the end, they do tell me there are fewer and fewer emergencies. Now, if you like emergencies once in a while, give yourself that option. Give yourself a block every day when you can jump into whatever emergency pops up. And I don't agree with completely planning every single moment of every single day. I think that's a bit too much. It's very overwhelming. Leave some blank spots here and there for those urgencies. And I know it's a time when you're most able to, you can focus on things maybe that, maybe a task that you don't particularly like to do, but that now that it's the last minute, you're going to be able to do it because you're running on adrenaline. Allow yourself a little bit of that every now and then.
Okay. There are the question says, for example, how do you fit interpersonal priorities in this? Work on relationships. And someone else says, what about my personal growth, hobbies, friends, my dream of learning to do X or Y? How do I make sure that those things, which are not normally considered a project or a one-off or a to-do list, how do I make sure that those fit into my life?
Yeah. So one thing is by creating the space in your agenda for that. I'm learning Spanish. I love learning languages. Well, I'm taking a course, so that forces me to leave the home to go to the course. I've got all these different pockets of time in my week when I can practice Spanish. I'm meeting with someone on a weekly basis she's trying to learn French and I'm trying to learn Spanish. So we exchange. So you leave you create those spots in your agenda. My husband he's an artist. He paints. Actually, the painting that you see in the back there, that's one of his. He, if you're seeing my screen, I'm not sure, but if he has periods every week on his Saturday and his Sunday, he's got big chunks of time when he paints, and that's all he does. He will do nothing else but paint. He'll have his music blaring and he loves that, and he'll paint. So you need to create those pockets in your agenda before you even start planning anything else. And ideally you want to keep those because they're important. They are important. Interpersonal skills, like our relationships. My husband and I had some challenges. We struggled greatly through ADHD at the beginning of our time together. In a week, we'll be celebrating 35 years of marriage, but it was hard at the beginning. And after, around our 15th year, we started getting to understand what we needed to do. And one of the things that we recognized was we needed to start dating again. So we made it a point to date every 2 weeks. We made sure that there was a block of time every 2 weeks in our agenda. And it was always on Saturday evening. We'd have a standing babysitter coming in. And on that day, we were planning to go out together. So the other thing was the personal development could be a project, by the way. Personal development could be a project as well. I have a personal development project.
And so learning Spanish might be a personal development example of a personal development. Okay. No, totally. I think that's really helpful. So you treat that the same way you would a work project or another project. This may be outside the scope of your talk, but I'll mention it because it's such a common problem and brought up by a number of people. And that is motivation, procrastination, difficulty getting started, actually starting the first task in a project or on a daily agenda. Some people, are mentioning that they know what they have to do. They have a good intention, but they just don't get started.
Yeah. So first thing is, sometimes the procrastination is due to the fact that maybe you're trying to do some big task first thing when maybe your brain is not yet energized. ADHDers need to stimulate their brain to get started. Everybody does for that matter, but for people with ADHD, sometimes that takes some time. And I mentioned earlier the idea of momentum. That's one strategy that you can use. You can start with a short task that energizes you, something that you really like to do that's short enough, but that's going to energize you, get your brain in gear, and then you can jump to the more challenging task. You could use something like a body double. Now, that's a strategy that works quite well. My husband and I make sure that we plan, because he was saying that he's had some challenges with planning on a regular basis. He keeps on pushing his planning time, but now he and I use body doubling to make sure that we both plan. So we meet on Friday and he plans on his end, I'm planning on my end, but we're getting something done. So you can use a body double. That's a really great strategy that works for a lot of people. The other thing, of course, you want to be when we're procrastinating, it's important to recognize what is the source of the procrastination, because it could be a number of things. Either I'm trying to do something at a time when my brain is just not able to do it. So if I'm trying to do something that requires a lot of focus at a time when I'm really not focused, maybe I didn't sleep well last night and my brain is just not working this morning. Then I might need to recognize that and to push off the task to another time and change it up with something that requires less focus. Maybe it's because that task is not a task, but a project. I don't know where to start. So you need to chunk it down into tasks then. You look at the project and you say, okay, what could be a first step that I could do that could get me going in the right direction in this particular. There's often people say, oh, you have to do the first things first and second. That's not necessarily true. Most projects, you can start with the wrong tasks and it's okay if it gets you going, and then jump into once our brains are in are started. Once you get, they say a body that's in motion stays in motion. It's the same with our brain. When we get started, we can, you guys are able to continue after that. Sometimes it's some fear. There's some information that I'm lacking in this particular project, or I've got a fear of failure or a fear of success even. I've had that happen when clients said, well, if I succeed, I'm going to end up with all of this work that's going to come my way, and how am I going to manage that? So that's another thing. So you want to determine the source of the procrastination so that you can determine how to tackle it. And there are a number of different strategies.
Yeah, procrastination is a complicated
one.
It's
incredibly.
And, there are a lot of articles on the Attitude site, by the way, that I hope one of them might help you. We're out of time, Linda. This has been incredibly interesting and provocative. There's some interest in, and maybe you can explain more about you mentioned your 8-week planning program. Where should information be found about that, and how does that work?
Well, the 8-week program, the group coaching program is going to be launched again, probably at the beginning of next year. I usually recommend that people take the energy one first, the focus to freedom. That if you want to have information, because it's not run all the time. If you want to have information, sign up for that creativegeniusreport.com, and as soon as that course is available, you'll be the first ones to know. I do a big splash about it. Report.com.
creativeGeniusReport.com. Okay, Linda, thank you so much, everyone. If you want to listen to this again, and a number of you have mentioned that there was so much here you'd like to do that, it will be available for replay on the Attitude website. Sometimes it's as soon as this afternoon, but definitely by tomorrow morning. So, Linda, thank you so much. I've been inspired, and I know everyone else has as well. And I hope you'll come back and visit Attitude again in the future.
Totally would love
everybody.
that. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.